The 23rd Olympic Winter Games have begun. The opening ceremony was Friday night. Who's caught some of the Olympics thus far? Okay. All right. The history of the ancient Olympic Games is really kind of interesting. According to the Olympic website, the first games began in the year 776 BC, or about the time the prophet Isaiah was alive. The games were held to honor Zeus, the king of the Greek gods. And for the first 250 years, the games were held in the sanctuary of Olympia, which featured an altar to Zeus. According to Wikipedia, the ancient games continued every 4 years for nearly 12 centuries until Roman Emperor Theodosius I suppressed them in the year 393 AD as part of the campaign to impose Christianity as the state religion in the Roman Empire. So, Zeus out, Christ in. That was the plan. A starting line of chalk washes away, but a starting line carved in stone at the stadium at Olympus lasts for centuries. Even the benches where the judges sat there in the stadium can still be seen today. By the 5th century BC, the Olympic Games would last for 5 days, with the middle day having a huge 24-hour barbecue and a sacrifice to Zeus. By the 2nd century AD, commercialization, marketing, commerce were part of the event, with vendors such as painters and artists and various trades selling their wares outside the stadium. So it was almost like an early Super Bowl. That was the event to be at every 4 years. And no matter of a threat of invasion or not, the games took place every 4 years. And during the time of the games, a truce was declared so that athletes could travel from their home city-states to Olympia in safety. To quote from the Olympics website, this classic example is that when the Persians invaded Greece in the summer of 480 BC, a lot of the Greek city-states agreed that they would put together an allied army. But they had a very hard time getting one together because so many people wanted to go to the Olympics. So they actually had to delay putting the army together to defend the country against the Persians. A truce for the sake of the Olympic Games. What are the chances of something like that happening today? Well, Friday night at the opening ceremonies, the world saw the Prime Minister of Japan, the Vice President of the United States, the President of South Korea, the President of North Korea's Parliament, and the sister of North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, all sitting together to watch the opening ceremonies. We all saw Kim Jong-un's sister and the President of South Korea shaking hands. It was the first time a member of the ruling party of North Korea had been on South Korea soil for 60 years. But the surprises didn't stop there. the North Korean and the South Korean athletes entered the Parade of Nations Friday night as one team. Amazing. And later, the North Korean and the South Korean women's hockey team played as one single team together in a match against the Swiss team. Amazing. Amazing, amazing. 28 centuries after the Olympic Games began, they still offer a setting where opposing nations can come together to root for their athletes and appreciate the competition with all the colors of humanity. The bright and uplifting and promising perspective of the opening Friday night focused on a lot of individual dreams. For many of these athletes, making it through the regionals and the quarterfinals and the semifinals and the qualifying trials is the culmination of years and even a lifetime of effort. Just making it to the Olympics is a mountaintop experience. And for those who were able to stand on one of these, it's a mountaintop experience. Our gospel text today tells us about probably the most famous mountaintop experience ever. And it occurs most likely in the second half of Jesus' ministry, since it's after Jesus raised the widow's son, after he raised Jairus' daughter, after feeding the 5,000 and the 4,000, after sending out the 12, and just before Jesus foretold his death for the first time. Jesus calls Peter, James, and John to go with him up the mountain. And we find the story in the 9th chapter of Mark. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up the high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them. And a voice came from the cloud, This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him. Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Can't we just imagine the curiosity of Peter, James, and John on the way up the mountain? So, Jesus, where are we going? Hey, Jesus, why are we climbing up this mountain today? Or, Jesus, why aren't the others coming with us? Peter, James, and John had already seen Jesus walk on water, feed thousands from a little bit of fish and bread, raise people from the dead, and now they saw him transformed. They experienced Jesus, at least in part, in his divine glory. And although frightened, according to the gospel there, they weren't frightened away. Peter wanted to put up 3 shelters so they could stay. He wanted the mountaintop experience to last. And then they heard the voice of God. That must have been a really goosebump experience. And then suddenly it was over. Moses and Elijah were gone. Jesus now looked as he did before, and telling them on the way back down the mountain not to tell anyone about this until after his resurrection. Athletes go up to the Olympics. They're also excited about making the trip and being a select few, but also not knowing what exactly will happen when they get there. They don't really know what they will experience in the Olympic Games. So it is with pilgrims who go to a Via de Cristo retreat. They're told a lot. Much is explained to them, but they don't know exactly what they will experience when they get there. For most people, the retreat is a mountaintop experience. In fact, those words are heard at the retreats all the time. And most people don't want to leave. Like Peter, they want to set up camp and stay in that mountaintop experience at the retreat. But like Peter, James, and John, who needed to come down from the mountain for their work and for their ministry, the work and the ministry is in the valley. And so it is with pilgrims at a Via de Cristo retreat. The important part is what comes after the mountaintop experience. It's not about the mountaintop experience. Olympic athletes aren't at the ice rink at 5 a.m. because it's comfortable. Like Peter, James, and John, Jesus took them out of their comfort zone to experience something that changed their lives. Olympic athletes, they don't relocate hundreds or thousand miles from home to train away from their comfort zone because it's easy. They're stretching and they're growing. Some athletes compete as individuals. Some compete in team competition. Jesus used the team approach. He had his 3 team leaders. He had his 12. He had his 72. And then those trained others. We're still following that model. Even athletes competing in individual sports don't get there alone. We know that. They have coaches and trainers and financial supporters and emotional supporters. It's like that at a Via de Cristo retreat as well. The retreat has a full host team and everybody has a specific job that they've trained for. The Olympic athletes are reaching for dreams. Dreams are something that aren't concrete, can't be weighed, can't be measured, can't be photographed. And yet dreams can drive a person as strong or stronger and further than anything physical or material. In the opening ceremony Friday night, some of the individual dreams and stories were highlighted. And even in a large delegation like the United States with 242 athletes this year, it's the individual stories that we want to hear about. And when we hear the interviews from the athletes there's 92 countries there at these Olympics. Those athletes always speak about how proud they are to represent their country. Whether it be a big delegation like the U.S. or small. There are 19 countries at the Olympics this time who are represented by a single athlete, such as Malta. Imagine the pride and maybe the pressure of being the sole representative of your country. Friday night's coverage included talking about the Nigerian bobsled team, the country's first ever entry into the Winter Olympics. And the story of the Nigerian bobsled team is kind of interesting. It involves 3 women who live in Houston. And at least 2 of them were born in Nigeria. One is a former track athlete. Now, hearing that Friday night reminded me, of course, of the 1993 Disney movie Cool Runnings. The movie was loosely based on the very true story of Jamaica's first ever bobsled team at the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary. Now, the movie departed from true facts in several ways, including the team's coach in the movie having a history of cheating. The real Jamaica bobsled team and coach, there were no such accusations. That wasn't the fact at all. But the movie is very entertaining, and it drew attention to the real team who, against all odds, pushed boundaries to accomplish new things. And in real life now, 30 years after the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary, Jamaica now has its first ever women's bobsled team in the Olympics. To quote Dan Wetzel of Yahoo Sports, he writes, "This is about unlocking possibilities, about opening up access points, about inspiring Jamaicans and anyone else who want to not just watch, but to listen. This is about changing narratives of just going for it." Meet Jasmine. Here. Jasmine, who grew up in New Jersey, is the daughter of a Jamaican father and a German, Polish, Latvian mother. And she returned to her father's homeland, Jamaica, to find some local women to give bobsled a shot. It's about hopefully establishing something for the long haul. There's an impossible dream to this. If it wasn't for them, no Jamaicans would be at these Olympics. Jasmine said, "So, coming back home to Jamaica, I wanted my Jamaican people to see they could do it. And that there's not just one path that way or one path this way to get out of poverty, to make money, or to make a name for themselves. If they want to be a Winter Olympian and do alpine skiing, now they see their fellow Jamaicans doing it." Wetzel goes on to write, "This is a lot deeper to them than a Cool Runnings reboot with an all-female cast." Now, in January, last month, they showed up at a World Cup event. These World Cup events before Olympics, by the way, are often the last qualifying step. They showed up at a World Cup event, and some people thought that they were there as forerunners to prepare the track for the real competitors. No one thought that they could break the top 20. They came in 7th. Just 53 hundredths of a second out of first. It's just over half a second. It's the basis for their faith here. faith and mountaintop experiences seem to be connected. Stepping out of our comfort zone and striving for something that's never been done before is part of our calling as disciples. Let's pray. Gracious God, we enjoy watching the Olympics and hearing the many stories about the athletes striving to reach the mountaintop. Help us to remember that we are also called to get out of our comfort zones and grow as your disciples. And all God's people said, Amen.